Oh, g'day champions. In the last video on this one, we just went over all the stuff we're going to do. So now we're going to bloody do it. So let's get into it. One thing I didn't notice in the first video is the ground on the whatever it is, the second last EL34 wasn't connected. So you had no screen grid on that one, so that wouldn't have been conducting. And this one with no ground, so that wouldn't have been conducting. So you would have been running on one half of the waveform on 2 out of 4 valves, which sounded pretty funky, like a fuzz pedal. So what we do want to do is give the top a thorough clean. To do that, we want to remove as much as possible that we're going to be changing anyway, and just leave the transformers and choke in place. So we'll remove the capacitors, we'll take off the valve retainers, and we'll give the top of the chassis a bit of a scrub. Now, because these capacitors have eyelets, unlike the new ones that have like forks, you can see there the cable can enter from the top. Normally you'd have to pull these wires out lengthways, where this is a continuous length of say 1 inch of strip wire that goes through both eyelets. So what I'm going to do is just remove the solder and then snip the top off the eyelet so it makes it like a fork, so we can just lift those wires straight up and we don't have to mangle them by pulling them through the eyelet. So we'll turn on the buffer, our mate. Ensure that we don't have to breathe all the flux fumes. I just want to get the solder out of the eyelet to the point where I can snip the top of it. Don't let it fly, because it'll end up in the air vent of your oscilloscope or something. Ow. A little bit more soldering heats. Grab the tweezers, all the needle nose pliers. We can just pull the leads out without disturbing them too much. Those 2 caps are ready to drop out. We'll do that to the second 2 as well. A little bit trickier with the resistors in place. We've got to pull them out too. Alright, we've got the resistors out. Do the same thing we did to the other one. Remove enough of the solder blob that will get to the top of the eyelet. Try not to melt the insulation like the previous tech. And those 4 are ready to drop out of the chassis. So get on to the other 2. One of which is hidden under the circuit board there. It's easy just to drop that out first before accessing its terminals outside of the chassis. And this one down here, we'll remove the fuse holders first to get access to it, because they're getting replaced anyway. Can we just take a minute to admire this soldering attempt? It looks like snail shit stuck on the terminal. They've done a little loop-de-loop and then just glued that to the surface. It doesn't pass through the eyelet at all. Yeah, it just makes the mind boggle, doesn't it? So they're not factory connections. At some point, someone's unsoldered these and either replaced the fuse holder or just unsoldered it for random reasons and then resoldered it. I don't know. Not sure if they're the original fuse holders, but if they are, whatever. They need to be changed anyway. But yeah, that ain't a factory Marshall solder joint there. So we go snippity doo dah, snippity yay. There you go, bye bye. And we'll clear the wires out so we can access that cap, drop it out. Well, those fuse holders are only finger tight anyway. I went looking for the spanner. No need. It's the mains fuse. Oh, that one's a bit tighter. That's the ticket. I chose metric by default because it says Taiwan on them, and that would be metric. So perhaps they were not original. Alright, so I've just spun the bugger around to get a bit easier access to that last cap, or the second last cap. Fresh solder, desolder. Now we'll flip it over to access the other one, and then we'll remove them all from that side while we're there. Just gotta lift the chassis to hold the nut on the inside of the chassis with my finger. Stupid flat blade screws. A little bit of a reach around job, but you know, sometimes you gotta just give the odd reach around to get ahead. So there we go, got access to all of the connections because that was sourcing its ground through that screw that we removed. So they'll just pull out easy. Set that aside for the new one. They've just got a standard eyelet there because they've got a star washer on the, well, it should be between the star washer is one of those black oxide things, which isn't great. Sometimes their conductivity through that black oxide is not brilliant, so we might replace that with an internal star eyelet, which the lock washer and the eyelet are one and the same. You'll see what I'm talking about. So in the meantime, all the other caps are free. So we'll go through and remove all their brackets. Some are pretty tight because they've never been undone before since 1975. I wasn't even a pickup line in 1975. One of those sockets looks a bit ill. Just noticed there, it's got a crack in it. I'll investigate that in a minute. One job at a time. And here when you undo the screws there's a little tick. That's the chemical bond between the two metals that's formed over the years. They basically start welding themselves together. And when you hear that tick, that is that weld breaking. Of course, the last one is too tight to undo easily, so we'll go from the nut side, apply our torque from there. So you can see there, that's the eyelets they use. They're not serrated. They don't have the internal star lock sort of pattern, little teeth. So we'll replace them with some that do, just for a better chance at breaking through that plating and ensuring a firm ground. So I'll grab my favourite little toy, little mini 1/4 inch ratchet. It's got a nice fine tooth to it too, so you can get in tiny little spaces and just get stuff get stuff moving. We'll remove this silly adapter plate. So there it is. Almost looks like a guitar jack plate, but yeah, not sure. Looks like the outside was stamped. Strange. Anyway, moving on. Alright, so the new one's not a great fit. It doesn't fit from the inside. Not without enlarging the hole. It doesn't fit from the outside without enlarging the hole. Yay. Well, it looks better than the one they had on with Texture, so I'll check with the owner. We'll probably modify the hole and mount that on the outside like that. Doesn't perfectly match this, but unless you're going to look for new old stock parts and sit on eBay for 6-12 months, I mean, why would someone take this off a functioning amp? So that's why there's none in the second hand market. So you've got to work with what you've got in this day and age. Now just remove the brackets from all the old caps, set them aside. Start our little fucket bucket of parts that we return to the customer when they pick up the amp. Everything goes back to the customer here, and if they want me to throw it out on the spot, that's their choice, but otherwise they get a bag to take home of all the stuff we changed out. They're free to test it if they would like in their own time to confirm that we're not ripping them off. But you know, electrolytics manufactured in 75. If you want to buy them on eBay, well, then I've got some beans to sell you too. Alright, so it's no wonder that last screen grid resist was missing. They were just tack soldered, and when I say tack soldered, I mean the leads haven't actually passed through the eyelet, the eye of the terminal. See, they've got little holes down there. The leads haven't passed through them. They've just put a blob of solder over them and then just stuck this to the face of that. So when I have a look at the solder joint where there should have been a screen resistor, there was no remainder of the lead left there. So the actual whole lead has just disappeared. It's not like the lead actually snapped or got cut. It had just shaken loose, and someone probably took it out, wondered what it was, thought it wasn't needed, and threw it out, which is probably why this amp was floating around on the second-hand market. But yeah, stuff like that's cool because you can get a bargain if you know what you're looking for. So just looking at this wiring here, that's not stock Marshall wiring. It's normally much neater than that. The grid connections, the control grid connections, the inputs to the valves are normally up in the air, and now they're like scrunched up and bundled up with all of this. That's not a stock cable tie. That's someone's redone that impedance selector switch, and they just bunched everything together with no regard to what wire does what, or what should be where, or what needs to be away from what. So this probably had issues just from lead dress as well, which generally in its stock form they don't have. So we'll undo these cable ties and we'll rearrange everything sort of more like it was at the factory, and we'll neaten stuff up, and we'll put those grid connections flying up above everything else like they were from the factory. This socket here is loose. Now that's not the screws that are loose. There's a collar that gets screwed to the chassis. and it's got little teeth on it. See down there? Those teeth are pressed into this phenolic base, and they're supposed to have enough tension on them to hold it there, but now that's shaken loose. Could have been a bit of shock from someone jamming something in there or something too, or maybe a valve got jammed in the wrong way and was stuck, and they reefed it out and caused damage to that little collar there. So the sockets seem otherwise okay, they need a clean, but I might see if I can just use a center punch to peen those back over to bite back into that phenolic base again, so we don't have to replace that socket. Generally when I replace one socket, I like to replace all of them from a aesthetic point of view, and also just everything the same. You know, we got our hands dirty and now you don't have to worry about it for 40 years point of view. So I'd like to save these sockets if we can, save the cost from blowing out for the customer, and just peen that over a bit. So we'll see how we go with that. So I'll try the automatic center punch for starters. It's broken. The pin flies out if you let go of it. But it sort of works, so I can't bring myself to buy another one. And that has not worked. Awesome. Not only that, but a section of socket broke off. Looks like it's already been broken off before and someone's tried gluing it. Oh, fuck. So, okay, let's replace 4 sockets. Just undid that cable tie, you gotta love it. The previous tech melted the wire with his soldering iron, so he put the cable tie right where the melt was to conceal it. Fuck me. So here's the socket that'll work loose from its bracket. Trying to punch that bracket tight again has resulted in breaking off a brittle piece of Bakelite on the front. It's got a residue on it which looks like it's been broken possibly before, and we just knocked it back off again. Someone's tried to glue it in the past. So we'll replace all 4 sockets. I often get blowback from customers if I go above a quote rate, or a quote price. It's sort of like, once you hand me the amp, now if anything else goes wrong, it's my problem, and I have to take a financial hit for it. I don't like that at all, so I've put in my quotes a acceptable margin that we can move by, so plus 25% of the overall labour cost. Parts cost, I don't know, maybe I should charge, well, I've got to recover the cost, I can't give stuff away. So I guess it'll be an option for them to supply their own parts, or I can supply them at cost, just to get the job done. This is the joy of an everyday business, repairing ancient shit. Almost everything comes in with extra stuff that you could not have foreseen. You try and put a margin on the quote and they go, what's this extra stuff for? That's not a problem. Like, why are you charging for that? That's not what I asked for. Well, chances are it's going to be an issue later on. If it's not, then happy days, I won't charge you for it. But part of the reason I started making these videos wasn't to get YouTube hits. It wasn't to make revenue, get advertising, anything like that. It was to show to the customer what was involved in their amp and how things like this happen. Once they happen, we knuckle down and we get the job done, but shit happens, and these videos were made to show that not everything's a straightforward, simple repair. Not to get sympathy out of the customer, but just to make them understand what's involved. Alright, now we get to have fun with our Bristol brush and a vacuum. We'll get this as clean as we can without taking the plating off, because the bristles are reasonably soft but harder than rust and corrosion. Right, so that's about as good as it's going to get. We'll put some, possibly just a tiny little wiping of WD-40 on that to remove any residual moisture in the rust. And hopefully we've stopped it in its tracks. Alright champions, here's the belt and replacement sockets. Mikkel X. That's the mica whatever 11 secret herbs and spices they use in the plastic. So they're about the same size. The main difference is the eyelets stand up directly instead of these angled over. So we might just give them a little bit of a bend just to space them out a bit and go through the tedious process of installing them, which I'll do off camera because, as I said, tedious. Just for better access to that area, we'll remove the speaker jacks too. Well, not a lot left in there. Now we can put all the bullshit back in. It's a lot easier to pre-wire these sockets with the screen grid resistor and the ground connection outside of the chassis, and then put them in pre-wired, ready for hooking up. So I was going to reuse some of the wiring from socket to socket for the screen grid connections, but they're just melted and too short. They were sitting up in mid-air. So I'd like to use some new stuff, put it down against the chassis. Some 600 volt rated PVC jacket stuff, and of course yellow to suit the original look. So I was just rerouting the plate connections to the output transformer here.
Yeah. Oh.
And the wires have been squashed. You can see it's just broken through the insulation there too. So I'm not sure where they were squashed by the previous tech, under the board somewhere, but we'll put a bit of heat shrink over that and route them properly. So the old cliff jacks are looking pretty corroded and tired. We're gonna change them out and clean off this red texture with some alcohol. Seems to be working with a bit of elbow grease. So here's a good example, people, of why you want to at least inspect the bottom of a board when you get a job like this. So someone's come in here and changed a diode. That's the main diode in the HT supply. They've worked on it from the top, and this wire was pushed against that, so they've melted through the insulation, and you can see the wire wiggling around, if I can get it to focus, because it's a dry solder joint. So it looked fine from the top. You'd be wondering what's going on. So this thing is just riddled with problems and gotchas, so we've got to check everything 3 times over. So luckily there was enough slack available on these leads to the standby switch that I could pull them through, and we'll strip that melted section and re-terminate it. So I think we changed this mains input socket, well, plug as it were. The pin's very loose. That's one thing, being loose in the plastic, but have a look at the terminals themselves, and they're not properly staked to those pins anymore. They're actually, the little panned over section of the pin isn't tight on the metal, so that would have issues and crackling and all sorts of power problems, possibly arcing, but more likely just crackling and intermittency, and it's no good with that, so we'll change it out. Sort of, it gets to the point where there's nothing original left in the amp. But if we didn't change it out, the amp would still have issues and it would come back, so we don't want that. Champions, champions, look what I've got here. Come here.
Jesus.
Oh Jesus. He's helping out.
Hello.
You know him.
Yeah.
So
the old man.
he's what are you working on? Tone King Gremlin.
Yeah.
I'm working on with the blown fet.
Yeah.
So there you go. He's too shy to do a video on that one.
No, don't do videos. I'm too ugly for videos.
Too ugly. That's what we got the soft filter for. So we're about to fire up this Marshall 2203. Well, what didn't we change on this one? So we've got starting from the power end, we have 2 new fuse holders there, heat shrunk, loaded with the correct fuses. We've replaced the IEC input. That existing one, as I showed before, had loose rivets as well as just really bad soldering. So we've got a new one of that. We've rewired the voltage selector as per the schematic. So previously it went mains input or active, voltage selector, fuse, switch, transformer. We've changed it to active, fuse, and switch, transformer, then the voltage selector on the neutral. So if that gets pulled out, at least it's on the neutral, not on the active. So we've also, moving along, we've changed the impedance selector, so I had to bore that out to a 30mm hole and spread apart those screw fixings, but now it looks the goods and is working good. We've changed the 2 speaker jacks because the existing ones were pretty corroded, and we've done some new wiring in that area with some nice heavy gauge bus wire to keep those jacks aligned. We've replaced all 4 output EL34 sockets along with their screen grid resistors. We've upped them to 1.5k just so it's safe to use, pushing hard on an attenuator without destroying the valves. We've put new grid stoppers in because the existing ones snapped off. They were bent back and forwards one too many times. What else have we done? We've got new caps everywhere. I've put new eyelets everywhere. So we've got these nice new ones that have an integral toothed washer in the inside. The stock ones are tiny little things. I think I've thrown them out. But they didn't have any serrations, and by the time you soldered to the eyelet, the solder was bumping into the nut. There was no clearance there to get a socket onto the nut to tighten them properly. So these new ones have a better flat spot there, so you can get your socket on there without any problems. So I tested the bleeder resistors there, balance resistors, 2 jobs in one. They are within spec, no problems there. We reused the wiring where we could. We shortened it a little bit, rerouted stuff better. You can see the wiring up here to the impedance selectors all bunched together properly. These wires going to the grid stoppers are flown up above the sockets just like they are on the stock amp. So that's all a lot neater. We have new bias caps, working our way along. I've traced everything in the preamp and everything's as per the schematic. There is one little snubber cap there. I'll see how that sounds and we might revisit that, but now it's ready to fire up. We can have a close listen and take a few measurements from the preamp end and see if anything needs attention over there. I just noticed before that there's a missing standoff here, so that end of the board's flapping around, so I'll put a new standoff on there. May not be the same screws as the original, but at least it's supported. I've redone the wiring to the main switch, or main power switch, and heat shrunk all of that. And on the front panel we've got some new knobs, new set of knobs. The existing ones were mismatched, and I think 3 out of 6 of them were cracked, and the screws were starting to strip out, so we just changed them all out for a new set with brass inserts and brass grub screws. And here's the top, showing all the new caps, nice and securely mounted. Double checked all the transformer hardware is all good. We've got, you can see the new belt and sockets there. The existing preamp sockets cleaned up okay, but we'll double check that they're nice and stable once we've got the 12AX7s back in. And we cleaned up the top of the chassis, got rid of as much corrosion as we could. But yeah, it's a big improvement, but you know, it looks like an old amp, which is what you want. Alright champions, got it biased up, sitting at what, 57.4% within 0.1% per side, so probably the best balanced quad of Electro Harmonix EL34s I've ever seen. So they're stable, And we've secured the board down. We've got that extra standoff happening now. Alright, so I couldn't help myself. I removed that snubber cap on that plate resistor, and to increase the high frequency stability after removing that, I ran coax to both grids of V1. One from the jack there and one from the volume control, or I guess the gain control, first volume. Preamp volume they call it on the front panel, but it's essentially a gain control. And that's lowered not only the chance of oscillation, but it's also lowered hiss, and it's lowered the level of hum. So yeah, it's a good improvement. Originality, like this thing's already been modified and fucked with pretty significantly, so let's just make it really, really good. So I've got a little Murata, I think that's how you pronounce it, cap down there across that 470k. That's the one I was talking about that seemed to be missing in the original amp. I've disconnected it for a moment because we're going to do a test with and without it. With and without you. That's the bright cap across the pot. That was already in there, so that's going to remain for both of the tests. But we'll just, for the customer's benefit, we'll compare with both of them out. He loves a bright 2203, so we'll probably default to putting it in, but just for his reference, he'll know what it sounds like without it, because he received this amp in a non-functional state. So now I've got the valve retainers back on there. The valves, once they go back in this time, they're staying in for good. But it's worth noting the precision molding of these Belton sockets and how much better they are than these stupid cheap ceramic pieces of shit that you see everywhere. These come on like some of the Bogners and stuff that cost, they're like $4,000 or $5,000 amps, and the center key has so much play in it. You can see it's barely a little nubbin there. You can insert the valves the wrong way. Look, you should be looking when you put a valve in, but having said that, set of valves goes on a gig, you're halfway through the set, you dark stage. It's the real conditions on the battlefield, eh? So these are much tighter tolerance. The pin itself barely, the center key barely has about 0.2 of a mil clearance around it, so it's nice and tight. And that key literally couldn't be inserted any other way. I've had valves where, amps where basically the only problem was the valves were inserted the wrong way because of these crappy sockets and, depressed cheapo steel on $5,000, $6,000 amps. So yeah, Belton is my preferred socket, as you may have guessed. Now it always sucks a little bit using the Electro Harmonics valves because they're so skinny. They're not much more than an inch in diameter, and these retainers have plenty of slop around it when you install them. I was using Electro Harmonics pretty much exclusively for EL34s up until probably early 2020 when I got a batch of failures. I needed a match quad. I think we got to the 4th or 5th match quad before there was an even match, and none of the valves had any. Well, it wasn't even the matching. It was, one was short. Second one of them had an open heater. Third one of them had a shorted heater. Just, I guess, I don't think that would be shipping damage. That sounds to me like they're having manufacturing issues, but I don't know. So I switched to JJ's. They were good for a while, then they almost doubled all their pricing, and at the moment everything's out of stock. Like every EL34 is out of stock at my preferred seller in Australia. I stocked up a little bit, but I've had to, if I need something specific, if the owner wants a specific brand or whatever, I'm willing to do that, but they've got to understand that they're waiting a while and they're going to pay a fair bit for postage. But supply in the US seems to be pretty well coming back online, but in Australia it's almost like my preferred manufacturer. It might be I don't know, I hope they stick around because they're really good. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, moving on. So here's my janky setup with what I currently have. I've got a mini tripod here, I've got my everyday phone, and I'm going to sync the video up later on. I'm still filming here because I'm recording using OBS as the digital audio video recording device software package, and I'll sync the video up later on. Underneath the bench I've got an SM57 miking up a Celestion G12T75 16 ohmer. Not that makes a difference in an open back cab, but the cab's pretty hard up against the wall. Close mic's about an inch away from the grill, and let's have a bloody listen, eh? I'll show you the settings here. At the moment the bright cap we were talking about is disengaged, so we'll take some samples, try to play pretty similarly, and I'll flip it over, we'll solder that cap back in and see what the difference is. So we'll start with the all the controls set to noon and go from there. You can see the controls in the video, so you know where we're at and what we're plugged into. So let's go for it. Right, so I'll stop it there. I'll flip it over and put that bright cap back in, and we'll see what the difference is in the high sensitivity input. Oh, can't remember if I mentioned this or not, but I did change that game pod out with a Burns 1 meg as well. The original one just wasn't cleaning up. It felt really easy to turn, like too easy. Like it had been rinsed and washed a million times with solvent and all its lube had come out. So the volume, the master, seems to be cleaning up a little bit the more you use it. So it has been sitting for ages. So I blasted it with compressed air, gave it a bit of lubrication, repeated that process a few times, but I think nothing really competes with just using the thing. And since using it the last day or two, it's improved. So if it doesn't get much better, or if it annoys the customer, I'll change that one as well. But I'll leave that one in for now and see how it goes. So the only thing left to do is pop these cage nuts back in, so we can put it back in its cabinet. Try not to stab my hand in the process, and this thing can go on living its best life for the next, I don't know, 30 years. And I almost forgot about the missing cage nut and the 2 missing screws, but we've got them in stock. Mate, I've got everything in stock. That's why I'm always broke. So I'll pop them in, and that's the last little icing on the cake, that it's got all its screws again and cage nut. So there you have it, champions. We've come to the end of another 2-part video series. These amps, particularly in Australia, mean more than just an amp. They're a good amp, but they symbolise the coming of age of a lot of us as we grew up with Aussie pub rock, you know, Akadaka, the Angels, all that good stuff. That logo there and these face plates were present in the back of all the photos that we grew up idolising. And the sounds, you plug them in when they're in healthy condition, no matter what setting you've got, it's that sound, right? It's variations of that sound, but the character's still there. So These things are a part of history, and they should be treated as such. They should be treated with respect, not modified, not drilled. They're becoming heirlooms now, so don't be permanently modifying these things anymore. If you want to do that, get a stereotone kit and do it with that. You can modify that thing till the cows come home. But these things now, we're custodians of these, and they're part of rock and roll history. So it really upsets me when I see them being hacked up, because they mean a lot to us. And even the JCM 800s and the 900s, even as we pushed into when I started listening to music and going to gigs, sort of the grunge era, they mean a lot to us, and we should take care of them. So anyway, I'm going to go before I start crying. See you on the next one, champions, and happy weekend if you're watching this. Yeah, probably on Saturday. Take it squeezy.